It's important that we debate this matter in this place because it affects the most vulnerable people in our society, children and young people, and most especially children and young people who have learning disability, autism or both, and who are often less able to communicate their thoughts and feelings or describe and bear witness to what has happened to them. As a consequence, there is an enormous imbalance of power between children and young people who often cannot speak for themselves and the adults into whose care they are placed, whether in a school, healthcare or residential setting. That imbalance of power confers a very clear and important responsibility on the staff who work with these young people, but also on the government to ensure a system which is transparent and accountable and properly resourced and equipped to provide the best possible care, education and support. There are very serious concerns which we are debating today about the use of restraint and seclusion and gaps in the regulatory and training framework in some settings, particularly education. But before I set these out, I want to pay tribute to the many dedicated, highly skilled and tireless staff who work in schools, healthcare and residential settings with children and young people with learning disability, autism or both. I pay particular tribute to the fantastic Turney School in my constituency and to Marilyn Ross and her exceptional team at the Michael Tippett School and her visionary work in establishing the Michael Tippett College, which enables 19 to 25-year-old students with learning disabilities, autism or both to be able to remain in education. Recent research by the Challenging Behaviour Foundation and Positive and Active Behaviour Support Scotland found that nearly 90% of parents with children with SEN or behavioural needs, including autism, reported that their children had been physically restrained. 35% said this happened regularly. More than half of these cases involved children aged between 5 and 10. Only 1 in 8 parents said that restraint was discussed with families in advance, and just 17% said there were discussions after the event to help prevent it from happening again. 50% of parents reported the use of medication to manage challenging behaviour. 58% of children or young people were injured, and 91% reported emotional impact, including PTSD, heightened anxiety and insomnia. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that such restraint is not necessary. We know that there are proven alternative forms of behaviour management which, with a little bit of education and training in these settings, can almost eliminate the need for restraint. We also know that the guidance and the regulation of the use of restraint in healthcare settings is much more stringent than it is in education settings. Ofsted makes it clear that it's good practice to record incidents of restraint or inform parents, but there is no requirement on schools to do this. This is problematic because it's precisely the schools which are already modelling good practice and have the best leadership and governance which will abide by advice, and those where there are problems which will be less likely to do so. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not acceptable that the Government promised new guidance on reducing restrictive intervention in schools in 2014, but that more than 5 years later that guidance has still yet to be introduced. No parent or carer should have to worry that their loved one will suffer violence, injury or psychological distress as a result of restraint in an education, health or care setting. Yet this is the reality for too many families. The gaps in the current legislative and policy framework are glaring, but they are straightforward to fill, and the delay on the part of the Government, which promised new guidance in 2014, is simply inexcusable. New legislation and guidance must also be supported by appropriate training and resources, and I call on the Government today to introduce new guidance and regulation as soon as possible and to ensure that all staff working with the most vulnerable children in our society are properly equipped and resourced to implement it.
Jim Shannon. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I congratulate the honourable gentleman for Norfolk for bringing this issue before the House and for the truly excellent speeches from right honourable members that we've had so far. Like other members, I've been inundated with schooling issues from the time I was